Ahoy, and welcome to the Travel Man podcast. Today on the podcast, I have Grumps, aka Travel Dad, back on. Travel Dad was on episode 12 of the podcast, Travel Man Talks to Travel Dad. Today we'll be discussing his love of cruising the seven seas with thousands of other souls and his suspicions on two supposable dramatic incidents that occurred while he and Mum were cruising around the depths of Ushuaia, Argentina. With a bit of cheek, he critiques and reminisces on his most recent cruise. I hope you enjoy his rant, just as I enjoy hearing him rant from across the mic. So sit back and enjoy two men discuss boats and death. Well, not all about death. I'm sure Dad has some funny stuff to say, even maybe some maritime conspiracies of his own. He might even mention the time he was whacked on the back of his head by an elderly lady's flying walking stick on a Club Med cruise in the Tahitian Islands back in the old days. Dad, you're back.
Yes, I am, Benjamin. Delighted to be here.
How are you?
Podcasting with Benjamin,
Yes.
the Travel Man.
Exactly. You know what we're podcasting about, don't you?
Yes, you've told me.
What are we talking about?
We're talking about cruising, as in cruising on ships, no other sort of cruising.
Exactly. Well, I might as well just start it with this question. Do you remember your first cruise? And if so, what made you continue cruising? It's not my thing.
Well, it wasn't my thing too when I first did it, which was fairly recently, in cruise ships, because as a boy, as a really little boy, I travelled the world on 3 ocean liners, which was what you did in those days. There were aeroplanes, but they were for rich people, and ordinary people travelled on board ships. And I went on the Strathnava from Australia to San Francisco, from New York to London on the Queen Mary, the real Queen Mary that is now docked in Long Island as some kind of tourist exhibit.
So it's a museum of such?
It's a museum there, and you can go and look over the old Queen Mary. I actually sailed on the Queen Mary as a child. And then the Strathnava, actually it was the Orion, or we called it the Rolling Orion, from Sydney to San Francisco. And then the Strathnava from Southampton back to Melbourne. So I was a child and experienced the days of being on board ships, and it was really terrific. And you can imagine for kids it was wonderful. There was no such thing as having a cabin, as they were called in those days, that nowadays they're called suites in the cruising business. There are no portholes or anything. You didn't have a porthole unless you were very rich. I was travelling with my 2 brothers and my mother, and on the way back with Dad as well. But we had the internal cabins with no view of the sea. So a cabin was like a cell, and it had a kind of an air conditioning.
A cell?
Had to have. Yeah, just like being in a prison, I suppose, and small. And it had bunks on either side. But I thought being at sea was fantastic, because you went and had 3 meals a day and could have afternoon tea and morning tea. In fact, you were fed the whole time by waiters in steamer jackets, as they were called, closed up at the neck, the sort of thing. And
Yeah.
they brought you food. And I remember, for us, from a rather repressed Methodist background, to sit at a lunch table and have 2 wonderful chops brought to you by a waiter with mounds of mashed potatoes served by the waiter from
And corned beef.
From his silver salver, onto your plate. Would the young monsieur like a little bit more mashed potato? This was fantastic. And there were all sorts of deck games like deck quoits.
Deck quoits. What's deck quoits?
Well, you stick there was a thing with a unicorn thing, a wooden base with a big stick sticking up out of it. And a quoit, you know what a quoit is, and you threw from a distance. There were marks on the deck, and you threw, and the person who got most quoits onto the ring, onto the stick, won the thing.
Okay.
There was also for kids, all sorts of entertainments for kids. There were dress-up parties, and there was there was a very small swimming pool, and they had greasy pole in which they put a pole across it.
Greasy pole?
Greasy pole.
Greasy
yes,
pole.
Greasy pole. And they put a pole across the, and then matched off the kids one against the other based on gender and age, I suppose. And the bowl was greasy with some sort of substance that made it slippery. And each kid started from each side of the pole and was given something like a pillowcase filled with sand or something, a sandbag.
So they don't scream with the greasy pole?
No. The point was you got to the middle of the pole, each of you, and had to hit each other off the pole into the water. And this was in the days when actually kids won or lost, and those days are gone because everybody wins a prize these days.
Everyone's a winner.
Everyone's a winner these days, much to the despair of the world as it deteriorates up its own fundamental orifice. But in those days, kids actually won or lost things. So you got on the greasy pole, and the kid opposite you, who might have been Terry from Perth, you know, and he was a little devil, and he had a sandbag as well. And you tried to whack each other off the pole, and somebody always won. But we had fantastic. And when you crossed the equator, as we did twice, once going and once coming back, you got a certificate from King Neptune to say that you'd crossed the equator. And
At what point do you cross the equator? Is that past India?
Somewhere it's in the Pacific, going from San Francisco to Sydney to San Francisco. It was halfway across the Pacific.
That way, right.
Then coming back the other way. Yes, it might have been in the Indian Ocean somewhere we crossed the Pacific because we came down through the Suez Canal. So if you like, as a child, I had wonderful shipboard, seaboard experiences in the days when the ships were a lot smaller than the cruise vessels of today, and they didn't have stabilisers, and they really rocked and rolled. The Orion was called the Rolling Orion, and only 10 years or so before it had been carrying troops all over the world, as had the Strathnaver and, of course, the Queen Mary, which had a long and distinguished history of taking, I think, more than 1 million troops across the Atlantic.
To war?
To war, yes, from America to the European front in the Second World War. So the Queen Mary was a highly distinguished troop carrier.
A naval vessel.
Yes, every square centimetre was devoted to troop carrying and to bunks. And you had bunks, and that was terrific too, because we never had bunks at home. And you climbed up into your bunk at night, and 2 or 3 deck bunks. It was terrific. So all of this means that I've had this in the back of my mind forever. And for me, until, as I say, quite recently, only perhaps 6, 7, 8 years ago, perhaps, I took my first cruise with Dominique, your mother. And until I took the cruise, I thought of cruising as sort of a rubbish sport, nothing like. It was not going to be an authentic and genuine experience such as I had as a kid travelling the world on passenger ships.
Totally different, though.
Totally different experience altogether. But our first one was not Dominique's, but my first one was up to Alaska. And that was...
Okay.
I enjoyed it actually much more than I thought I would, and because you are looked after hand and foot. There are, on the particular cruise line that we've gone on, there are The food was really very good. They had a couple of specialist restaurants, which were excellent. You pay a little bit more for them to go and dine in them. The things that, and so the experience of cruising, they have very good entertainment, they have very good musicians and singers, and the ships themselves have their own resident song and dance crew, and they make up little musicals. They're not particularly good, but the individual entertainers, the comedians and magicians and that, and some of them are not so good, but in the main, they're very good. And there are quite stringent auditions to perform on board ships. And you can go to a show every night, and it costs you nothing. The food costs you nothing.
It's all part of the package.
It's all part of the
deal.
So
you pay
X
one
amount.
price, and then everything's
yes, we
paid
get
for.
things a little bit cheaper than most people would. So that was an attraction too. But I just thought that it wouldn't be the same experience as I had as a kid. And of course it isn't, because these are enormous ships, 3,000 passengers. They have stabilisers and all kinds of things,
ballast,
all kinds of things that make sure that you get no experience of seasickness or no experience of riding the waves unless you're in very heavy seas. And that's happened in the 3 or 4 cruises that we've taken. I think I've done 3, so it's happened only one or 2 days over a period of a few hours. You get quite heavy seas that the ship is going through, and you feel a little bit of the swell, but really it's so minor these days that you don't go on a cruise to experience the feeling of sailing the 7 seas, because you just don't get it. It's like being in a massive hotel. The big ships are good because you don't have to. You tend, because there are so many passengers on board, you tend not to see them all that often, the same passengers. So you don't have to, there's no feeling.
So you don't bump into each other too much.
No, there's no feeling that you have to fraternise with people the whole time. You don't have to be in each other's pockets as there is in small cruising. I'll never forget, I've written about a couple for various publications, Gourmet in America and 1 or 2 publications here. I've written stuff about exclusive resorts, and there's nothing more mind-numbing and awful as these tiny exclusive resorts that are incredibly expensive, and only rich people, which ultimately means boring people, go to them, and they're all interested only in their businesses and themselves. They're totally narcissistic. They don't mix, and they get put around a table for only a dozen people, say on a Fijian island, where you have to pay $10,000 a day to go there, and everything laid on, food and drink from a fantastic Australian chef, etc., and beautiful Australian wines and all the rest of it. But the people who go are just appalling people who are, of course, highly successful only because they're appalling people. Most people who are successful, of course, are dreadful company. And I never forget going on a couple of these things. One was in New Zealand, one was in Fiji, and I wrote about them, and my golly, it's just awful. So the bigger the ship, the better, in my view, because you don't have to talk to anyone and you can just do your own thing.
Of course.
There are gyms, there are pools. The best thing about cruising is that you can, well, there are a couple of good things. You see the geography and the topography of parts of the world that you would not see otherwise.
In a plane, obviously. Yeah,
well, in a plane you can see them from,
You don't see much in a plane these days.
Kilometres away. But from a ship, you actually can go quite close to amazing landscapes and the fjords of up around
Denmark,
Alaska. You can see fjords in Denmark. You can see
There's some down in Argentina.
The ones in Argentina, the glaciers coming down to sea, and the tremendous glaciers in up around the coast of Alaska. In general, people who go on cruises, on these big cruises, and I should say this right from the outset, they're more mature people, they're senior in age, They're interested in history, geography, landscapes, looking at things that are spectacular from a landscape point of view. And the other thing is that when you go on a cruise, such as, say, the Baltic cruise, you get to visit for 8 hours, and we find that 6 to 8 hours in a particular city, it's not enough, of course.
Doesn't seem like enough.
No, not to explore the city in detail, but you get a fair idea in 6 to 8 hours walking around, seeing some of the major sites, going into one or two of the great museums. You get an idea of what the city is like, and that's a good thing too, because to travel to cities, say, in the Baltic, to go from St. Petersburg in Russia to Tallinn to Stockholm to Copenhagen, to these places would not only cost you an awful lot of money if you were to do it by yourself, hiring a car and even taking the train and putting yourself up in hotels for 2 or 3 nights in each of these places. That would cost an awful lot of money. And so that cruising allows you to do that, and all you have to do is get back on board the ship, and that's one of the best things about it. You get back on board the ship, you know you're going back there, you've got your dinner ready to go, and you can go down to dinner at any time. We make sure we can do that on board the ship.
Is that one of the reasons why people enjoyed a cruise, do you think? That flexibility?
Yeah, absolutely. You get to see a lot of places that most people don't see or can't spend a lot of time in.
And you get to see it by boat too.
Such as Russia, such as St. Petersburg. Well, it's not so much seeing it by boat. You don't see anything coming into the commercial wharves.
But you see from the boat.
You see some lovely things from the boat.
The nature, which you wouldn't see from a car, I don't think.
No, remote areas is even more interesting.
Yeah, well, I was going to say there's many cruises that you can choose from. One option for you is that tropical cruise, which I'm sure you've done before, which takes you around various islands like Tahiti and other places like that, Fiji, Vanuatu, where you can hop off for a day and do what you said. You can look around, even if it's minimal amount of hours, like 6 hours or so forth. I don't personally think it's enough, especially if you want to check out, say, Bora Bora, and you're there for 6 hours. It's not a lot of time to figure out, how the country ticks. You can go for a swim and all that, but that's not enough time.
Well, you can read how Tahiti ticks in about 20 minutes on the internet. And Bora Bora, about half an hour, and Bora Bora will tell you all you need to know about Bora Bora. And all
Is
those
Bora Bora boring?
Boring, absolutely. Okay. And all those Tahitian islands are for people who are pretty brainless, not very intellectual, and who just go there to lie in the sun, mainly French, and lie about naked and get brown. Funny you should mention tropical cruises, because I've only done one that, and I was writing about it for the Australian Financial Review. And I was invited on a Club Med back in the old days, 25 years ago, when Club Med was a significant player in the tourism business worldwide, and they had a ship called Club Med 2, which was a modernistic, futuristic, technologically right at the edge sailing vessel, as well as a motor vessel, and it must have had, small, very small compared with modern day.
How many
cruise liners?
1,000 people?
Oh, no. A few hundred passengers, I say.
That's
and a few hundred,
very small ship.
A few hundred passengers, a few hundred staff, and a small ship. It wasn't very big at all, and it had the staff, the Club Med staff, so the usual structure of Club Med animators and people who would allegedly look after the passengers. But it was curious because this ship usually, I think, sailed around in the Mediterranean, but in the off-season to the Mediterranean, or in the winter of the Northern Hemisphere, they decided to bring it down to Tahiti and do a tour through Tahiti. Now, the market for that ship at that time was, of course, rich Californians. And so the marketing pitch was on this particular cruise, the one I went on, was that for every year that you'd been married as a couple, you got a percentage reduction off the price, the full fare of the cruise. And I think it was about 7 days or 7.
How long were you married?
And so I was doing it as a professional journalist, so I just came along with it.
Fair enough.
But there were, of course, that meant that there were many people in their 70s, 80s, 90s even, who'd had discounts on their tickets of 30, 40, 50, 60% off.
Yeah.
And so they were getting it for 40 and 50% of the price of the ticket. And so it was full of old senior people. And some of them, of course, being Americans, were not only hugely, massively overweight, but also very ancient. And so there were a lot of walking frames and walking sticks and all the rest of it. And this ship really wasn't designed for them.
For the elderly. There's no handrails.
The whole Club Med 2, Club Med is all about young people having fun and the 3 S's and all the rest of it. And Club Med was built on the whole idea among Europeans.
What's the 3 S's?
Sand, sun, and I've forgotten what
is it 6?
Forgotten what the third one is.
Sun, and sex?
It could be. It might be that. But anyway, Club Med was built for young Europeans who lived at home with their parents in a small apartment to go out and have some fun with opposite members or even the same members of the same agenda when they went on holidays in Europe. That was why Club Med was so successful, because it found that market niche. So Club Med 2 was a boat built for Club Med, and it was designed mainly for young people. And here it was
swingers
doing a Tahiti. I don't think so. Doing a Tahiti run with old people from California. Now, getting up in and out of the ship, you often had to go down this fairly steep gangplank. And so the old people, all the Californian oldies, had a great deal of trouble doing this, sort of stuttering and staggering.
With walking frames and so forth.
Walking frames and walking. I remember one day I'd already gone on board and was sitting somewhere near where they came off the gangway. And I remember writing about this in the Fin Review, but a woman was so pleased when she reached the top of the gangplank that she raised her arms in the air and more or less said hallelujah and threw her stick away. And it hit me right in the gob.
Oh, jeez.
I was hit by a walking stick on board Club Med 2. And really, I've been to Tahiti a couple of times. It's nice. The snorkeling is fantastic, and you see beautiful fish in the water. And if you want to do diving, you can do. I think I've done that there as well, scuba diving. And you can do all those things, but it's essentially very boring, and the local...
Excellent. Tell us more about how boring it is.
The local French Polynesians, of course, are not very appreciative that the whole of France subsidises their lifestyle. So, and there's not a lot to see there really in any kind of intellectual sense. Beautiful scenery, a few nice beaches, lovely coral... Nice weather, lots of sun.
But some of the most popular cruises are through that area.
Yes, because I can understand that. People would like to see that, and that's understandable. They like to see those things.
Does it really care, though? Does it really matter how the Polynesians are to you? I mean, who cares if you're just swimming and enjoying the beach and having cocktails and getting really drunk?
There's a big difference between going to, say, Polynesia, Travel Man, and going to Southeast Asia, where people are absolutely aware of the importance of tourism. The locals in Tahiti are very much aware that their whole lives are subsidised by the French government from France, which subsidises one of its external territories, which is what Polynesia is, and they couldn't give a stuff about tourism or people or tourists.
Well, that's fair enough, Daddy. I was going to say, I had a question I was going to ask you. You've probably gone over it before, but why do you think that so many people do enjoy cruising?
Well, I know why I
Because I've got no interest in it.
I know why I enjoy it, and that is the ability to see places that would be difficult, see cities that you haven't been to before that would be difficult to see in any other way, and landscapes. That's why I do it, and because everything's found, and you get well fed and well looked after in comfort. The cabins are excellent these days. They're brilliantly designed. Got an ensuite. We choose a balcony so you can go out and look at the sea. All of that is very romantic to me and very moving to look at the sea and how it changes, and to watch the waves and to watch the seabirds and the sea animals that come by the ship. All of that is fantastic.
And obviously that's only an experience that you can get from taking a boat.
Absolutely.
Have you ever done the Danube cruise? Because that takes you from Germany's Black Forest region and flows through various Eastern European countries. I think it goes from Germany to Austria, through Slovakia, Hungary, Croatia, Serbia, Romania, Bulgaria, Moldova, and then on to Ukraine, where the river ends and flows into the Black Sea. Has that been something you ever wanted to do, or have you done it?
Never, and I would never want to do it.
Why not?
Travelling on a river, give me a break. It's not the ocean. There are no dolphins. There are no
beautiful.
There are no
champagne,
seabirds coming past.
Caviar.
There are no penguins.
I'm sure there's dolphins
in the water. You can't see whales. There's nothing. Travelling on a
so that doesn't interest you?
Not in the slightest. And I've been to all those cities in Europe anyway. Who cares about whether you can do them on a boat? I can't think of anything more. It's like people who take these stupid cruises on the canals in Britain and France.
They sound lovely.
Well, okay, you might as well go down on the Gippsland Lakes and fart about down there. It's the same thing.
Down in Lake Entrance.
There's no experience. There's no romance. There's no grandeur. There's no ocean. I'm interested in doing things in which I'm out on an open ocean. In fact, the last cruise we did, we particularly liked that because there were days at sea, whole days, and we went from, this was another thing, I specified in the last cruise we went on that we needed to go from point A to point B and not from point A back to point A. Cruises generally are circular in that they leave a port.
And they return.
And they return to the same port, and they see a few things and they return to the same port. The last cruise we did, which was, I think, the best experience I've ever had as a tourist, was from Valparaiso in Chile around to Buenos Aires in Argentina, via rounding Cape Horn, which I thought that they would never take a cruise ship round.
That would be incredible.
It was the most amazing tourism experience, and I've had many I've ever had. And not only was the ship good in terms of food and drink and luxury and experience and comfort, but we saw in the Beagle Channel, in the way down in South America, the south of South America, the most remote areas, and you're looking out at this.
It's fjords through there.
Fjords, at this incredible landscape, glaciers coming down one after another.
Icebergs? Is it cold
icebergs,
enough?
Icebergs, it's cold enough for small ice floes to break off the glaciers and hang about a bit, and steep, rugged, forested cliff sides on each side, perhaps 3 or 4 kilometres wide. The Beagle Channel might be even wider than that in parts, but in narrow bits, not very wide at all. And you knew that that no one was there. You were looking at here we are in all the comfort of a cruise ship, thousands of people looking from the decks of the cruise ship.
And it's desolate countryside.
It's rainy and wet and green and forested and densely forested with huge trees and forests. Wow. But you knew that you were looking at something that very few people in the world would ever see.
Because it's hard to get to.
And yes, it's very hard.
By a car or a bus.
Well, you just can't. There are just no roads.
There's no access.
No access.
Unless you've got a boat.
Unless you go, and you could probably go with four-wheel drive to these areas if you're on shore. But going down the Beagle Channel, where Darwin went, was for me incredibly moving and an incredibly rich experience, which I will never forget. And these little towns at the bottom of the world, Ushuaia and Punta Arenas, and these places are, okay, it'd be better if you spoke Spanish, which I don't, but these places are just absolutely stunning.
Do they have natives that populate the area?
Well, they have indigenous
people?
Have indigenous people who've been there forever, and most of these little cities you see faces of people who are clearly descended from indigenous inhabitants of many millennia ago.
Like Native American?
Yes, in the same sort of sense, yes, there were, and you see them, but the little cities are modern, small but modern towns.
I wouldn't have thought they were modern.
Even in summer, it's cold there, and the wind blows, but it's really interesting.
What do you think they survive on, food-wise?
Well, there's a lot of fishing and commercial fishing in those areas.
Yep.
There are minerals, but essentially, I think tourism is a big thing in places like Punta Arenas.
Of course, so they rely on people to disembark boats
from cruises
and purchase
mainly cruises. It's
souvenirs.
Thousands of people going past there in cruise ships to these small towns. The channels and the harbours are very deep because the mountains are steep. They go in deep, so you've got very deep ocean berths, and it's just one of the most amazing things because it's so remote.
And do you think boats frequent those little towns, or is it maybe once a month they get a cruise liner in? Or could it be even more frequent?
I don't know. You'd have to look it up, but I think it'd be more frequent than that, yes.
Considering they rely on it.
Only summer, don't forget. In
winter it'd be closed off?
Yeah, well, in winter they'd get...
Frozen over?
No, not frozen over, but you just wouldn't get anybody because it's so cold and windy. But in summer, when we went there, we were in there in January, that's the season when they run... Well, I imagine many cruise ships go around there. I don't know. It'd be worth looking up.
Yeah, it's something that I'll probably look up later on. I was going to ask you, tell me about the time, I think it was Ushuaia, it could have been further up on that same cruise that you supposedly witnessed or thought you may have been on the boat with two people that passed away.
Well, yes.
Because that's very interesting.
Well, it's interesting only in that cruise liners and cruisers in general, as I've mentioned before, tend to market themselves these days, unless you specifically look for it, they're marketed for people who are older and have the money to go on cruises. So that means that they're often retirees, they're often a lot older people. And two things happened on the South American cruise, and as I say, I couldn't remember exactly which port it was. It might have been Ushuaia. There is another port in Argentina around the other side. We went to, and I think it might have been there, but I can't recall the name of that one. It wasn't Punta Arenas. It was around the other side.
Okay.
But anyway, the ship was late getting out, and we wondered why, and there was an ambulance. We were looking over the side, as you do when the ship leaves.
Sure.
Always interesting. They still had one of the gangways down to the wharf going. Hadn't been taken up, and it was, 15 minutes beyond the departure time.
Delayed.
And there was an ambulance
parked
at the bottom of the gangplank. And
okay.
we thought, this is a bit odd, so we watched, and a woman fully dressed in white, a rather large woman, came out of the ambulance with a bloke, I think, and all kinds of equipment in boxes, and they went on board the ship. And then perhaps 15, 20 minutes later, this woman was taken off the ship on a stretcher. I think it might have been one of those stretchers that go into ambulances with wheels. And they might have actually taken it on board the first time. My memory's a bit vague on that. But anyway, she came off, and there were kind of seat belts anyway, attaching her to the stretcher, completely
Maybe she lost the plot.
Completely covered up with a blanket and the blankets.
Over her head?
No, not over her head, but right up to her neck. And then we watched from a matter of only a few metres away from an upper deck, and there were kind of elastoplast over her eyes, and her face was completely pale, and she wasn't moving. So I just wondered if she died on board and had some kind of a... but the saddest thing was they put her very slowly in the ambulance. There was no hurry. And the saddest thing was this fellow who wandered down the gangplank afterwards carrying the luggage. Perhaps somebody was helping him with that, I can't remember, but he looked completely forlorn. And I think that was...
That's sad.
Yes, that was a newly created widower, I suspect. And so that was terribly sad. And then on the same ship, either a day or two later, we were eating alongside a woman who was very much younger than the man opposite her, who was an American. She was from Sydney, she kind of declared. And he was in a terrible state. He looked as if he was having a heart attack. He was extremely overweight, sweating, very unfit. I got up and said, look, you've got to do something to help this man, to one of the stewards, one of the serving people there. And the young woman, who somehow or other we found out she was from Sydney, but she lived with this man in California, I think. And she said, oh, no, he does it all the time, mate. No, he'll be right. It happens all the time. And eventually, it must have taken half an hour while we were having dinner, someone came down to see him. And why he hadn't died on the spot, I don't know, because he was in really bad shape. And I got up a couple of times and said, this man needs help. A doctor or nurse came up from the ship's infirmary or medical station or whatever they call it, and was checking him out with all sorts of equipment and that, and immediately got him into somehow or other, with the help of several people, got him up and into a wheelchair, and he was wheeled away with his, partner, girlfriend, whatever she was, mistress, looking rather exasperated that he was ruining her holiday. So I don't think he had much of a holiday either. And
no, it doesn't seem like it.
Can report no more as to what the outcome was. And of course, they don't tell you on these kinds of ships about those incidents. That's all hushed up. But I suspect with 3,000 passengers...
But he looked pretty sickly. He
looked terribly ill. With 3,000 passengers on every cruise, many of them elderly, you're bound to have the odd KO every so often and carking on the spot. If not dropping dead in the infirmary, or they can do a lot of things, apparently. There are a lot of doctors.
It's a floating morgue. It's got a police station, doesn't it?
It's got an operating theatre for a lot things.
An operating theatre?
Well, they can do all sorts of things on board, emergency medicine. They can do a lot of that on board. So it's very well set up.
What if the doctor's had a few the night before with a few mates and has to go downstairs to start an operation and there's only him?
Well, I'm sure the doctors are fully professional.
He's feeling a bit dusty.
Benjamin, that wouldn't happen.
I'm just thinking it
I don't know how your mind works sometimes. You don't think like that. Doctors are doctors. They're getting paid to be there, Ben. They don't just get a free trip.
Well, they've got to have a bit of fun. They probably don't do anything on
They're
board.
not allowed to do that. Like, they're not like the captain of that cruise ship who was having a bit of fun with his girlfriend
the
and
Italian-
half-smashed Italian bloke,
Oh.
and now he's in jail.
What was that called? The Conquistador? No, probably not.
Whatever.
I was going to say Conquistador. Dad, I was going to say. I like saying Dad, I was going to say. I've got to really cut that out. Dad, tell me some pros and cons to staying in cabins. So I know you've stayed in many different cabins or staterooms in cruise ships. Is there a best location? Because I read an article recently on cruisecritic.com.au. The link's actually in the show notes. And it says if you want to avoid feeling seasick, choose a room that's on the lowest level of the ship and is in the most central part of the ship, as this will be the area most likely to feel the least amount of bank and roll from the ship. That's probably correct, I'm guessing.
Yeah, I suspect it is.
Do you usually choose rooms that level?
No, it's
not really.
all rubbish. It's all totally irrelevant.
You don't believe that?
No, I do believe it, but it's totally irrelevant advice because there's no movement in these ships. They're the size of small villages. They go through the ocean with stabilisers on either side, and umpteen of them. Their engine pods are also stabilisers, and they stick below the hull of the ship. There is no way the ship moves anywhere. You could be on the top of the mast and you'd feel no movement most of the time, almost 90% of the time.
What if you're at the front of the boat like the Titanic? That scene with Leonardo DiCaprio and Kate Winslet.
Well, we're not talking movies here. We're talking real life, and cruise ships, they don't get an interior cabin because the whole point of cruising is looking at the ocean.
Okay.
And experiencing the ocean in all its many wonderful geysers and the light against the ocean and the horizon and all that. Never, ever, ever. They're the cheapest and they're not worth buying.
Okay.
Interior cabins. Get something that you can actually see the ocean, and if possible, try to afford a balcony because that's the best. It's not a balcony with a suite, but a balcony you can actually get out in the ocean and look at the ocean from your own cabin, from the balcony. They talk about ocean views. That means you get a look at the ocean through a window, through a porthole. Often the ocean views, and they will say so in the cruise liners, are obstructed by a lifeboat or some other device.
That's okay.
And then you can't see anything. And an ocean view is not really good because they're also lower down, whereas the balconies are up higher.
Well, there's 4 types of rooms that you can get, or suites. So I might just run through that quickly just for the listeners.
Yeah, cabins, yep.
Or cabins, yeah. So the worst would be the inside room, which you just spoke about, which has no windows, no windows.
Rubbish, but cheaper.
Actually, it would feel quite claustrophobic, I'm guessing, as well.
Yeah, like in the
It'd be
olden
the
days.
smallest little cabin. So I don't know how anyone would want a room like that. I couldn't deal with that for 7
they do
nights.
If that's all you can afford, do it anyway.
If that's all you can afford, just don't cruise. That's my opinion.
Okay.
So another room is the outside room, which has a porthole with a view of the outside that, could be obstructed by the view of a lifeboat. So I would read up on that before you actually book an outside room. It's also called an ocean view room.
That's right.
There's the third room is called a balcony room.
Yeah, that's the balcony.
And that has a balcony, obviously, that you can sit on.
Yeah, there are 2 seats, little table.
And you can see the ocean from there and
of course.
see everything.
You're in the outside. You're in the outdoors.
Bit of people watching.
No,
if that's your thing.
No. There are baffles, which means between each balcony, so you don't see the people
So you don't see anything?
alongside you.
Oh.
Yes, you see the bloody ocean. That's why you go on a cruise, Benjamin.
Well,
I've spent 40 minutes. Have I not convinced you yet?
No, I'm not.
That's why you go on
I'm not going to have to do it.
Cruise.
I just don't want to have a cruise.
Because you've got no romance in your soul.
I have soul. I have a soul.
Where is your soul?
It's downstairs.
It's like
It's where the scones are.
it's like the old joke with Graham Kennedy and Geoff Ellen, and Geoff Ellen came on dressed as one night in Melbourne tonight. He came on dressed as a pirate.
Arr.
And he had a big hat on, and his ears were obscured by his hat. And Graham Kennedy, Grey said to him, "Joffa, if you're a pirate, where are your buccaneers?" And Joffa said, "Under my bucking hat."
Oh, you are just such a funny guy. Now, Dad, the best room that you can stay in, which would obviously be the most expensive, because I'd say there's only a certain amount of these rooms available on the cruise ship, is called a suite cabin. Like, it's a real super sweet cabin.
Just have a bit more space.
Cabin.
You don't get a bigger balcony. You get the same size balcony looking out in the open air.
They've got separate living area.
Yeah, that's all. That's
sleeping quarters.
That's all, but you don't need it.
And you get a large number of amenities.
No, you don't.
And services available
You don't get anything different from a balcony or anyone else.
So you're saying for the extra few $100s a night, it's probably not worth it?
A suite is not worth getting, no.
Are you sure?
Absolutely.
Okay,
you don't
enough.
get any more service or any more different things with a suite than with a balcony room.
So whoever's listening, that one singular person, get the balcony room.
Yeah, balcony's the thing.
It's Travel Dad approved. Now, Dad, have you ever been sick on a cruise, like really bloody sick?
Never.
Because I can imagine myself just vomiting.
Never.
All the time, even though there's ballast and stabilizers.
Never.
I reckon I'd just be sick.
You feel no movement, ship movement.
What if you look out to the horizon?
Most of the time. Well, the horizon's so far away and the ships don't move.
So you're saying it's
completely still.
Completely straight.
You're going at 19 knots, which is, I think, about 40 kilometres an hour.
So no swell. You can't feel any of the swell.
You can't feel any swell.
So this is the problem with me and cruising. I always think I'm going to get sick on the cruise or I'm going to feel the swell. And the last thing I want to do is
You're like
for 12
your mother.
nights,
you imagine the wrong things.
Well, I'm imagining me being very sick and getting operated on by some drunk surgeon.
No, you don't have to think about that.
Fair enough, Daddy.
Okay.
Daddy. I mean, Travel Daddy. Do you think the Titanic sinking is a conspiracy theory? Only I've got this to tell. I've got this to say. Apparently, the Titanic had a small hairline fracture on its bow that led to it. Bow.
A bow is what you put around your neck.
And a bow is what's below the surface of a boat.
Unless it's a bough of a tree, which is BOUGH.
Okay, we're not going into
adventures in words.
No, we're not doing that today.
Right, okay.
So apparently on the bow, there was a hairline fracture that was not structurally sound. And the iceberg actually hit it exactly on the edge of this not structurally sound fracture, which the boat builders knew that the Titanic had, but had to launch the Titanic on a certain time, certain date, so they didn't have enough time to fix this issue and thought, you know what, everything's going to be cool, because that's what they said back then. Everything's going to be sweet, dudes. And let's just get this thing out on the road or on the sea. And let's smash that champagne bottle on the side, knowing that there's a fracture at the front of the boat that if it hits anything, the boat will capsize.
I think you've meandered off the business of cruising.
No, I'm still talking cruising because we're talking Titanic now.
1912, for instance, I don't think people would have called each other dudes. Nor would they have cared less. And there are so many theories about the Titanic. It's just one of those marketing things. If you make a documentary about the Titanic, you're bound to sell it worldwide. So that's why they keep thinking up stuff. The people in the media and communications industries.
Well, they've been theorising for a long time, haven't they?
To keep the idea going and keep the idea trundling along about the Titanic and all the things that happened to it. Frankly, it's incredibly boring, but there were mistakes made, I understand, in the construction of the Titanic, and I don't know enough about it to say any more.
Well, I brought you on today just to talk the Titanic.
No, you didn't.
Yes, I did.
Well, I misunderstood my remit today and why I'm here.
Have you watched the film with Leo DiCap? And Kate Winslet?
A long time ago, I think. I think it was incredibly boring because we know what happens. It just sinks. That's the story of the Titanic. The ship sinks.
And guess what? All the rich people got the boats.
Of course.
And all the poor people got nothing.
Well, that's what life's all about.
The poor get nothing, the rich get everything.
That's the whole principle of the capitalist system, to make sure that those who are rich continue to be rich and get richer and richer and richer, whereas the poor get poorer and poorer and poorer. That's the whole point of capitalism, to continue privilege.
Capitalism. How did we get onto capitalism?
Well, you've got to talk about capitalism if you mention the Titanic, because that was an icon of capitalism.
Fair enough, Daddy.
Right. Anything more we need to say?
I don't think there's much more to say unless you want to talk.
I can't think of anything more to say.
I can't think of anything to talk about.
All right, let's have some scones.
I'm thinking about these scones. I'm thinking about the jam, the cream.
And a bit of coffee.
And maybe
a lovely morning tea.
And I'll show you my compost bin, because I'm proud of that.
Good, lovely.
Thanks, everyone. I really hope that everyone enjoyed this conversation that Dad and I had on the Titanic. And you can follow me on Travelman Pod. That's Twitter. Travelman Podcast for Facebook, Instagram. I have a website which is notoriously hard to find unless you just look in the show notes. Then it's very easy to find it. That's a Travelman Podcast. If you type Travelman Podcast in google.com, you will find me. And I'm on all good podcasting apps. I'm on iTunes. Please subscribe. Please give me a 5-star rating. I'm going to try and get Dad on many more podcasts. You going to come on more podcasts, Daddy?
Well, if you wish.
What do you think of my little trees? Because I've never mentioned them before. I've got Christmas trees in here.
Christmas trees
got
with
little lights on.
Lights in them. Reminds me of that silly man, the mayor of Geelong, who did $1 million Christmas tree and parked it on a kind of a floating wharf in the Geelong harbour.
No one cares about that, Dad.
No,
okay,
no,
ciao.
Just silly.
All right, bye.